Okay, so let's talk about something that sounds, well, like a total contradiction. Soft law. We think of law as hard, as binding, as a set of concrete rules. So how on earth can law be soft? It's a concept that can be a little tricky to get your head around, but trust me, if you're studying international environmental law, understanding this is absolutely essential. It's the key to how the whole system works. So let's unpack this paradox together.
Right, let's just get straight to it. When you're studying law, you're trained to see things in black and white, right? It's either legal or it's illegal. It's binding or it's not. So this idea of soft law, it just feels a bit strange. But figuring out the answer to this question is how we unlock a much more nuanced and, frankly, a much more realistic view of how international law actually gets made.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll define what this paradox is all about. Then we'll dig into why countries actually choose to go this route. After that, we'll see how these soft ideas can actually grow into hard law. We'll even look at a cool twist, when hard treaties start to act soft. And finally, we'll see where soft law has its biggest impact, creating the guiding principles for everything else.
Okay, first things first. To really get why soft law matters, we've got to have a clear idea of what we're even talking about. This means looking beyond that simple hard versus soft dividing line and finding the really important gray area in between.
Here's the textbook definition, and you really gotta pay attention to the wording. The two magic phrases here are non-legally binding, but normatively worded. What does that actually mean? Well, non-legally binding means a country can't be dragged to an international court for breaking it. But, and this is the important part, normatively worded means it's written like a rule. It uses words like should and shall to set standards and guide what countries do. It creates this powerful expectation that you'll follow along even if there's no formal punishment.
Let's make it even simpler. Think of it like this. On one side, you have your classic hard law, the stuff you learn about first. These are treaties, signed and sealed, and customary international law, which are the unwritten rules everyone follows. On the other side, you have soft law, things like declarations, guidelines, codes of conduct. But the key takeaway here is that these two sides aren't separate worlds. They're constantly interacting, with soft law often paving the way for hard law down the road.
And you'll see soft law pop up in all kinds of places. If you're studying for an exam, these are the examples to remember. You've got UN General Assembly resolutions, you've got codes of conduct from organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization, guidelines from the UN Environment Program, and what's really interesting, you even have resolutions from the groups that manage hard treaties, like the International Whaling Commission. They're all different flavors of soft law.
Now, if you're tempted to think, okay, non-binding, so it's not that important, this right here is the slide that should change your mind. The 1992 Rio Declaration is the bedrock of modern environmental law. It's not a treaty, you can't sue anyone over it, and yet it's constantly cited by courts and legal experts as the single most authoritative source for the field's core principles. This is the paradox in action. Its power isn't about formal enforcement, its power is its evidential value. It's a snapshot that tells us what countries agree the rules should be.
So this leads us to a really logical question. If treaties are the gold standard, why on earth would countries bother with soft law? Well, it turns out there are some really smart, strategic reasons for choosing the non-binding option.
According to the source material we're looking at, it really boils down to three main perks. First, it's just plain easier to get everyone on the same page. Second, it's way more flexible when things change. And third, it lets governments sidestep a messy political process back home. Let's break each of those down.
Okay, advantage number one. Imagine trying to solve a huge new problem, like the early days of tackling climate change. The science isn't 100% certain yet, and the potential costs of action are huge and scary. Countries get really nervous about locking themselves into a rigid, permanent treaty in that situation. Soft law is the perfect solution. It lets them get together, agree on some basic principles, and start moving in the right direction, all without tying their hands completely. It's a way to get the ball rolling.
The second advantage is just pure practicality. The official treaty process can be incredibly slow and clunky. I mean, trying to amend a treaty can take years. And that's a huge problem for environmental issues where the science is always evolving and you need to update technical standards. Soft law is so much more agile. You can update guidelines or a resolution with a simple vote, which lets you keep pace with new discoveries.
And the third reason is all about politics back home. In a lot of countries, getting a treaty approved is a massive deal. It has to go through parliament, there are debates, and it can get stuck for years or even fail completely. Soft law commitments can often be made directly by the government without all that hassle. Now, the text does point out a downside. Because you skipped that big political debate, it can sometimes be tougher to get the money or the new domestic laws you need to actually follow through on your promise.
All right, now let's get to how this whole system connects. A lot of people mistakenly think of soft law as just a weak substitute for a treaty. But that's not the right way to see it. It's not usually the final destination. It's the starting point. It's often the first step on a path that leads directly to binding, hard international law.
And this is the central idea here. Countries use things like declarations to sort of test drive an idea. They build a consensus, they agree on the general principles, they figure out what the main issues are. And once everyone is comfortable with those ideas in their soft form, it becomes so much easier to turn around and write them into a formal treaty. All the hard work of negotiating has basically already been done.
And this isn't just a theory. We've got the receipts. Look at this table. In 1985, there were soft law guidelines on nuclear safety. The very next year after the Chernobyl disaster, the world was able to create a binding treaty on nuclear accident notification incredibly fast because the blueprint was already there. Or look at the UNF guidelines on environmental impact assessments from '87. They practically became the 1991 ESPO Convention. You see the pattern. Soft law acts as the rough draft for future hard law.
Okay, exam alert. To understand the other ways soft law becomes hard, you have to know this term, opinio juris. It's a fancy Latin phrase, but the idea is simple. Customary international law, those unwritten rules, has two ingredients. First, you need widespread state practice, meaning lots of countries are doing the same thing. But second, you need opinio juris. They have to be doing it because they believe they have a legal obligation to. It's the psychological part, the belief that it's a rule. So here's where soft law comes in. A big, widely supported UN resolution can be powerful proof of opinio juris. It's evidence of what states believe the law is. Remember the Rio Declaration? This is what we were talking about. And of course, a resolution encourages other states to start acting that way, which helps create the state practice part. But, and this is a big but, not all soft law is created equal. A resolution that everyone agrees on, a consensus one, carries way more weight. And its language has to be norm-creating. It needs to sound like a rule, not just a vague hope.
Okay, so just when you think you've got this all sorted out, hard law on one side, soft law on the other, we get a fascinating plot twist. What happens when the lines start to get fuzzy? What happens when a totally official, formally binding treaty is written in a way that feels soft?
Let's take the Paris Agreement. It's a treaty, no doubt about it. It's hard law. But look closely at the language. It says parties should protect the climate system. And its main engine is nationally determined contributions, which means every country basically gets to decide for itself what its commitment will be. That sounds a little different from a hard and fast rule, doesn't it?
This forces us to ask a really important question. How binding is this really? And here's the crucial insight from the source text. You can't just look at the form of the document, whether it's called a treaty or not. You have to look at the formulation of the rules inside it. If a rule in a treaty is really vague or just aspirational, it starts to function a lot more like soft law.
And this isn't some new trick from the Paris Agreement. Its own parent treaty, the 1992 Framework Convention on Climate Change, did the same thing. Article 3 says parties shall be guided by principles, and then the principles themselves use the word should. These are called framework treaties. Their job isn't to lay out every single detailed rule. Their job is to set up a big tent, to establish the broad principles that will guide everyone's actions for years to come.
And that leads us perfectly into our final point, which is maybe the deepest and most important role that soft law plays. It's not just about creating specific rules or inspiring treaties. Its greatest power might be in establishing the huge, overarching principles that shape how we think about the entire legal system.
Take the concept of sustainable development. This idea really came to life in soft law documents like the Rio Declaration. It's not a simple rule like don't pollute. It's what some scholars call a meta-principle. That means it's a principle that acts on other rules. For example, you have a country's right to develop its economy, and you have its duty to protect the environment. Those two things can clash, right? Sustainable development is the principle that steps in and helps mediate between them, forcing judges and diplomats to find a balance.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Soft law isn't a weak or second-best option. It's a completely different tool, and it's an incredibly important one. It's flexible, it's dynamic, it allows the world to make progress even when things are uncertain. It lays the groundwork for future treaties, and it establishes the fundamental principles that guide the whole show. Which leaves us with one final thought. In a world that's changing faster than ever, maybe the future of effective international law isn't so hard after all. Maybe it's soft.